Okay. We're continuing Halacha Aleph and Shulchan Hey. Last time. Last time we started talking about Tziruf Sal. So I'll give you a 30-second recap of what we said last time, just to get us prepared for what we're doing today. And that was like this. If you have multiple batches of dough, and each one of them did not have a shir challah, but you put them together they would have a shir challah, then they can be mitzurf. They can join together to make a shir challah. You need a couple of conditions or a couple of things we talked about. One is that they have to be touching, and they have to be in some kind of a container. If they're touching and in that container, and together now they have a shir challah, then they're mitzurf to be shir challah. Some of the details were, first of all, is that Tziruf Sal could happen even after it's already baked. Doesn't have to happen when it's in a dough form, even after it's baked. Second is that it has to be somewhat within the walls of the container. Only things that are within the walls or the border, the lip of the container count towards its tzir, not things that are completely out of it. And last was that doesn't have to be a formal container. It could be a piece of cloth or something else like that. Also counts also to make a Tziruf Sal. Okay, now after that we spoke about separately is that the din is that tziruf in a tanner doesn't work. Tziruf in a sal works. Tziruf in a tanner doesn't work. We had 4 possible reasons, and towards the end of today we'll bring that back up again. How that plays into what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so now those were what we did last time was the more basic dinim of Tziruf Sal of how and when it works. Today we're going to get into a little more complicated things. Not terribly, just a little more complicated, which will have more practical applications, I think. Okay. Now, as I just mentioned, and we spoke about last time, Tziruf, as discussed in Siman Shin Chaf Daled, we're in Shin Chaf Hey now. Shin Chaf Daled requires something called Neshicha. The things have to touch each other, and the way the Mechaber explains it in Ardin, they have to touch each other so well that if you pull them apart, a piece of one would stick onto the other one. Okay, they're like really connected to each other. Okay, that's a chiddush of Tziruf Sal, but Tziruf Sal does not need that. They just need to have negiah. They need to touch. They don't need to have Neshicha. Okay, so, but that said, the din is the Neshicha takes the place of, negiah takes the place of Neshicha, and therefore the same rules apply. Okay, that is what I mean to say is like this. In Shin Chaf Daled we had rules that say only certain minim are mitzuruf with each other. Now there are certain rules of what things can be mitzuruf. Those rules still apply. We're just substituting Neshicha for negiah because we're in a south. That's one thing. That's the more straightforward thing. But the more contentious thing is what about the thing that are going to be in Shin Chaf Vav? Okay, we're in Shin Chaf Hey. In Shin Chaf Vav, it's going to talk about that you can only have tziruf when the person is comfortable with the things mixing with one another. Okay, he has Tziruf Sal. The Ramah has a case there. If a person has one batter of dough that has spices and one does not have spices. Okay, two almost the same thing. One is spiced and one is not. The Ramah says those cannot be mitzurf because the person wouldn't want those to mix one with the other. They're 2 different recipes. So if, to some say, the Beis Meir says that the same thing works by Tziruf Sal also. But Tziruf Sal the Beis Meir says it does not true by Tziruf Sal. You don't need to follow those dinim in Shin Chaf Vav because he says that only makes sense when you need Neshicha. They need to be touching each other so well that one piece would pull onto the other one. So then it has to be that you really don't mind them mixing with one another. He says, but over here you don't need Neshicha. You just need them to touch each other. So as long as you're comfortable with them touching, even if you don't want them to mix, that's okay. Okay, but that's what the Beis Meir says. This is in Aruch. The Beis Meir says that, but the Pri Megadim in Aruch brings a raya from Kesef Mishnah, and from a documentary that did not agree with that, and they held that the din of negiah is negiah with a Tziruf Sal is just a substitute for neshicha, but the rules of Shin Chaf Vav still apply, and therefore you have to be comfortable with the things mixing, even though they don't have neshicha, they're just touching it, even though they're already baked. Imagine if you take a piece of chocolate cake and you take a matzah or a piece of sugar cookie and they touch each other. Okay, nothing's going to transfer. You don't mind them touching, but you would very much mind if they mix with each other. The 2 tastes are very different from each other. You wouldn't want them to cross. So then, in that case, there is no Tziruf Sal. Even though the way that they're touching doesn't bother you. It doesn't bother you what they're doing, but to transfer you would not be comfortable with, and therefore there's no Tziruf Sal in that case. So as you realize, that's automatically a very big limitation on the rules of Tziruf Sal. We're going to basically only have Tziruf Sal now in cases where the foods are basically the same. Okay, the person made many batches of the same thing, then you can talk about having Tziruf Sal. In other words, it's not as broad as you might imagine that Tziruf Sal could happen with all kinds of things mixed together, because no. As soon as you don't want them to mix, flavor-wise, you don't want the foods to mix with each other, which is lots of foods, then all of a sudden there's going to be no Tziruf Sal. Okay. So, as an extension of that, Chaim Kanievsky brings, there's a whole deal in the later Achronim about this, he brings that the same way that if you don't want the foods to mix, that there's no Tziruf Sal, he says also, if you, Lehedya, do not want Tziruf Sal to occur, you're putting it into a container, but you're saying that there should not be Tziruf Sal, then there's no Tziruf Sal. Okay? If you specifically have in mind not to work, then there's no Tziruf Sal.
Even with those that are exactly the same.
Even though if theoretically it could be Tziruf Sal, it cannot be. But he brings,
like
he said, right, correct. He brings a deek from Mishnah Berurah to it, and he says that logically, if you have no kavanah, then there is Tziruf Sal. Okay, and if you remember, we spoke about this last time. That's the reason why we do Tziruf Sal for matzahs. When they bake matzahs, you're specifically not supposed to have a shir challah. You're supposed to make it in small batches so that it won't become chametz. And over there, they specifically, after the baking, make a Tziruf Sal, and the reason is because you don't want to have later a mistake Tziruf Sal. If you wouldn't do the Tziruf Sal, you're so close to having a shir challah, there's a potential that tomorrow the guy's going to take it home and do a Tziruf Sal by mistake. So they bedaf to make a Tziruf Sal, and that's to avoid this mistake in Tziruf Sal. Yeah, that's a deal, that there's such a thing that it could happen by mistake. It can't happen if you don't want it to happen, but it could happen, so to speak, by mistake. A bunch of Achronim talk about it, but he brings a riot. He brings riot, and he says, no, if you have kavanah specifically that there should be no Tziruf Sal, it doesn't happen. But if you're just neutral, you're just not paying any attention to it, then it would happen. Okay. Now, next thing is, we had said that not only can you do Tziruf Sal, the Shulchan brings it, the Rama brings it.
I haven't explained that. I mean, it's never shared here.
So it connects to Siman Shin, because it connects to Siman Shin Chavav. In Siman Shin Chavav, it says you can only have Tziruf if you'd be okay with the foods mixing with each other. So it's like it's an extension of that. Is that you have to sort of want them to be together. Now, there it doesn't say you have to like that it's happening. You have to just not be opposed to chocolate cake and brownies mixing with each other. But
in other words, it's sort of an objective thing, a subjective thing. So of not wanting. They say that in certain cases it's just objective that you wouldn't want. One has tava, one doesn't have tava, and it doesn't require kavanah.
Right.
The question is, what if you bedafka have kavanah when the two items are dissimilar?
Then there
should be
Tziruf Sal. Yeah. Those are Shin Chavav kind of dinim, but it's both subjective and objective. There's a standard what you guess and what the.
Yeah, let's say if two matzahs look exactly the same. It sounds like even if you just don't want to have a sheep challah.
Right, that's what. Well, what do you mean? You don't want Tziruf Sal because you don't want sheep challah. That's good. Yeah, that's good. Yes, that's good. So it's a step past that, but it's connected to the Shin Chavav kind of ideas, which is that it has to do with you being willing for them to come together. Okay. So now, I told you, I don't remember, it says right here in this thing, that you could do Tziruf Sal with a cloth also. It doesn't have to be a container, it doesn't have to be a box. It could be wrap them up in a towel, that also makes Tziruf Sal. Okay? So, Rabbi Yashin says, it doesn't have to be a formal piece of towel either. He says you put them into a paper bag or into a plastic bag, you can do Tziruf like that also. There's no conditions to what it has to be. It doesn't have to be a container. It can be even a cloth. Well, a piece of paper, it does the same trick to us. Okay? So just put that on the side for a second. We're going to get back to that in a second, what that means. Okay, now, there's another to-do in the Achronim, is what happens like this. I told you the foods have to touch each other, and they have to be in the container. What happens if they're in a container, there's this big container that has all the stuff in it, but the things are individually wrapped? Okay, so the things are not touching each other, but they're in small containers, and the small containers are all touching each other. But they're in one huge container that would hold the full shir challah. But let's say individually there are 4 packages, and those 4 packages that are in there, each one doesn't have a shir, but they're all again touching each other, and in one really, really big container that's around there. Okay, so when you say Tziruf Sal in that case also, okay, on the one hand it's got to touch, they're not touching. On the one it's got to be in a container. It's in a big container, and they're sort of touching each other. Okay, so it goes like this. So Chaim Kanievsky makes a deek from the Mishnah Berurah that there would be tziruf in that case, and then he says to you, I looked at my father's personal Mishnah Berurah and scribbled on the side of that place in the Mishnah Berurah. He writes that he agrees that if the kalim are touching each other and they're one big kli, then there would be Tziruf Sal also. And he brings from some sefer that I don't have, that they asked Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, and he said the same thing also. Okay? So he told them also that if the kalim are touching each other and they're all into one big kli, then that's a tziruf. Okay? However, Rav Zalman Auerbach says, no. He says it's not true. He says, if something is when we talk about things being mature in a kli, that teaches us something. When something's in a kli, that's like its own unit. So he says, if I take 10 challahs and I wrap each one of them into its own bag, okay, you go to the bakery, they put each challah into its own bag. He says, once it's in a container, that's it. You can't be mature with anything else. This is the sal. The fact that the 10 bags of the 10 challahs are in one very big bag or in a big box doesn't make a tziruf afterwards. He says, if they're in a container, that's finished. You can't be any tziruf afterwards. He says, I'll be masking, but if you put them with just something in between them, like as a separation, it's like you have wax paper. You have all the challahs stacked up with just wax paper in between them. Not that they're wrapped in something. They're just something separating them, some minor thing that, he says, that would be tuffle to the bread or the challah, and therefore then there would be tziruf in that case. Okay, so again, if it's wrapped completely around the thing, if it's its own sal, so to speak now, there's no tziruf. But if it's just something tuffle to it, then it could be tziruf. And Rabbi Yashiv said something similar to that, just different. He's willing to say it's even tuffle, even if the challahs are in a bag. Even if they're wrapped completely, but if it's a tuffle to the thing, then he's willing to say that it worked. But if it's not tuffle, then he would say there's no tziruf.
But he'd say at Tziruf Sal, if you put all of them together in a bag?
Yeah, if you have one big container.
Which is a bag.
Yeah, big. He's okay with a bag, but when the bag is just a tuffle, then he's willing to ignore it and say it doesn't count towards messing up the connection between each other. They're considered to be touching in this really big container. And Rabbi Shimon says, no. He says, if each one has its own thing that would qualify as a container, then you're finished, and then you can't have a tziruf after that. He says, if it's in this container, it's not in that container. So, pick one or the other. Okay? So the nafkamina, the case the nafkamina is, okay, we have a person, we have a rebbitzin, okay, and she wants to make shalach manos, okay, for everyone in shul. Okay? She's making everybody a cake in shul. Okay? She can't make a huge amount for everybody at once. So every day, she makes a bunch of cakes. Today she makes 10 little cakes, and tomorrow she makes another 10, and the next day another 10, and none of them have a shir challah. And she keeps putting them away, all these things, she's sticking them, putting them away for the day when it's going to come Purim, then she's going to give them all out. Okay? Then comes Purim, and she does a Tziruf Sal. She takes all these little foil, each cake in its own little foil pan, and she stacks them all together in a big box, or she wraps them in a towel, or she does something that would be a Tziruf Sal. Okay? So, the way Chaim Kanievsky said, now, again, I said to you that I implied, which is what he does say, that there is tziruf no matter what. He brings rayas against it. I'm not saying he's not 100% convinced, but he says it, and from his father and his grandfather-in-law, that it's okay. So let's say he's going that way. According to him, there's going to be a tziruf. All the cakes are the same. They're all chocolate cake, so they don't mind them mixing with each other. The fact that each one is its own little foil pan, covered up foil pan, doesn't bother him. As long as they're in one big container, there's going to be a tziruf sal. According to Shlomo Zalman, once they're completely wrapped up, each one is completely wrapped in its own thing, there's no way to make a tziruf. And according to Rabbi Yashiv, we'll have to judge, are the foil pans tuffle to the cake, or they're not tuffle to the cake. You'll figure out for yourself whether they are or not considered tuffle to the cake or not. Okay? So that would be a case where with all the other conditions of Tziruf Sal are there, everything's right about it. There's this really big container that has all these, 50 cakes inside of it, but the cakes are themselves each wrapped into its own thing. That would be the case for nothing. Okay, I'm sorry. It says here on the side right here. Ignore the fact that the shadows of Almaz. We'll get to that then. No. I don't know. I don't think it qualifies that. It's not negated to right now. You will find them when we get to Amnas L'Chalik. The Tziruf Sal and Amnas L'Chalik are very intertwined with each other. So we'll find them. Be patient. Okay. Not for today. Okay. Now, then for the next thing, about large containers, I need to give you a drop of background. That is like this. Okay. There's in the 15th paragraph of Masechtas Kelim, it talks about all the special dinim that apply to things that are not metal kelim. What the term calls kli eitz and kli or beged or sak. A bunch of different kinds of kelim that are not metal kelim, and they have all kinds of special dinim to them. Okay, so one of the things it says there, it says that if those kelim are machzikim memsa, if they're very large, okay, then the tar, which is to say, if they were tameh before and they lose it tumo, or they can't become tameh if they're that size. And the reason for this is because the Torah calls it it's called a beged or a sack. They're all compared to each other. So just like a sack, it's meant to be as something that you carry things around in, and you take it around even moli vareka, even if it's full, you take it around. Also, so too, the other kelim that are not those psukim are only considered to be a kli if the metaltal moliv reikon. When something is bigger than memsa, it's not metaltal moliv reikon. I'll explain more about that in a second. Okay? So what? Okay, it's a din about tumah v'tayra, which things are kelim or not kelim. That's in Mish Parak Tesvav. Then, if you go Parak Yutes, it's talking about the same dinim. Okay, the case it's called a shida. It's a kind of a box. And the shida is a continuation. Is what the Mishnah called in Tesvav also a shida. So you have the shida. So it says like this. You know that the something that's machzik memsa, which helps us understand it better, is what the Gemara tells us also is the size of mikvah. And the size of mikvah is 3 amas by 1 amma by 1 amma. Okay, so the Mishnah has the Mishnah in Parak Yutes has a machlokes. When you want to measure this 3 amas by 1 amma by 1 amma to decide if it's machzik memsa or not, so Beis Shammai says you measure that by what the volume that it has, what kli the container hold, the internal measurements of the kli to decide if it's machzik memsa. Machzik memsa doesn't hold memsa inside of it. And Beis Hillel says that we don't measure from internally, we measure it externally. Is the whole kli, including the walls of the kli, the structure of the kli itself, does memsa. And I don't know what really the pshat is, but it could be that the machlokes is. I see the Hafrashas saying a different reason. Could be the reasons like this. If what's the reason why? What's the patur of something not being total moliv reikon? You can't carry it moliv reikon. Okay. If the reason is, as some say, because if it would be moli, it would be too heavy to carry it around. The reason why you can't carry it full is because it's so heavy. If it's such a big thing, it would fill it up with, I don't know, whatever, popcorn, it would be too heavy to carry it around. Then, if so, we should include the walls also, because that goes into what you can't carry around. You can't carry the walls either. If you have something like this with filled up and with walls, that this 3 amas by 1 by 1, you can't carry it. Okay? If the reason why it's not metaltal moliv reikon is because it would not be strong enough to carry its contents. Because you can't fill it up, because if you filled it up and you try to pick it up, it would smash. It wouldn't be strong enough to hold what fits inside of that thing. Well, then it doesn't make sense to count the walls, because forget, having the walls actually give strength to it. Maybe if you have bigger walls, makes it, that will not break. It'll be stronger. You'll be able to more carry it around. Okay? So maybe that's a machlokes Sham Beis Hillel. What the reason is not so important. But of course, we pass like Beis Hillel. It'll be counted from the outside. Counted from the outside. I'm jumping ahead a step. Okay, as you see, we're heading to refrigerators. Okay, so what happens if you have? I'm skipping a drop, but just bear with me. What happens if you have a container? So we count from the outside. What happens if the outside has like something stuck onto it? Okay, the outside doesn't just have. It's not just a box. Not just the out. We count the outside walls. Good. Okay. What about the handle on it? What about the legs? What about other parts onto it? So it's also talked about in the next Mishnah in Parak Yutes, and what it seems to be, I don't know that Mishnah perfectly, I can't tell you I know it perfectly, but there's a machlokes about little appendages like legs and handles and things like that, and you'll see in a second we're passing that those do not count, but things that are really attached, that are considered a part of the kli would count, and to me it seemed, I'm not 100%, but to me it seemed that therefore the 2 chambers, like the fridge and the freezer, should count. When we're measuring the outside, what is the outside dimensions of this box? We don't say that there's a refrigerator that's one box and a freezer that's another box, but we look at it. It seemed to me from that Mishnah, we look at the 2 parts together. Okay, we wouldn't count the legs, we wouldn't count the space in between the legs, but the other part of the refrigerator, the top and the bottom, count as one unit together. Okay? That's how it appeared to me. The whole outer case, right? The whole unit, not the handle, not the legs, but the top and bottom together. To me, it seemed like they would count. Okay. Okay, so now, all of this is very nice. All this is very nice if we wanted to talk about Tumah V'Tara. Okay, this is all sounds wonderful for Tumah V'Tara. If you want to know if you made a refrigerator out of bones, would it be Makabel Tumah if it was this size? Okay, so this is all very nice. Okay, it comes from a pasuk, it has to do with Tumah V'Tara. Okay, lo and behold, but the Rishonim bring this din for all kinds of other things. Okay, the thing it's most famous for is, in Hilchos Shabbos, there's a rule, Ein Binyan, Ustira B'Kalim. Okay, the rules of binyan apply to structures, to holos, but not to kalim. Okay, kalim have their own dinner, but they don't have the dinner of binyan. So the Rishonim say, you want to know, how do you know whether something is a kli or a binyan? How do I know if this box is it a house or is it just a very big box? And the rule is, well, that says the Mishnah Kalim. Okay, the Mishnah Kalim. If it holds more than 40 sa, then it's a bias, so to speak. It's an oil. And if it's less than 40 sa, then it's not. Okay. What does that have to do with anything? What on earth does this have to do with begging or sakwa and everything? So obviously the thing from there, the term is being mounted to us, what is a kli and what's not a kli. These things are kalim, and when you get past a certain size, it's not a kli at all. Just not a kli at all. This is beyond that, so the next, step up we have from that is an oihel or a bias, and therefore, so just like it's not makabel tuma, so too it's also not, there's opinion in that thing now if it's so big. Okay? So, just as an aside, that dinim of memsa does not work for metal. A metal kli that's more than memsa is makabel tumah. But the reason for that is because metal doesn't have to be a kli. Okay? The tumah of metal is not dependent on it being a kli. Metal can be a needle, and it's also makabel tumah, even though it's not a kli. And it could be
kibble.
It doesn't have to be kibble.
Kibble is kli.
It has to. Right, what I'm saying is it doesn't have to have the same. Okay, I'll take it back. It doesn't have the same rules as Kalim, like these other things have that. It doesn't have to have these couple years, correct? So therefore, on the opposite extreme, on the other side is the other rules about Memsa. The Mishnah says it doesn't have the rule of Memsa. The rule of Memsa doesn't apply to Kalim, and it's connected to those are all the nafkamis in Parak as well of metal Kalim from the other Kalim.
People use that also to pater big kalim from tefillas kalim.
I was going to say that. That's a shayla. We'll get to one day we'll do tefillas kalim. Rishon Kluger talks about that maybe big kalim shouldn't be chayiv in tefillah for the same reason. Okay, that's another example of here this dinim. Here this tefillas kalim is a little closer to Mishnayos kalim. Kalim. It's a little closer to the Mishnayos and kalim that has it's better than this case, which is Hilchos Shabbos. Right? You think it has no shayla there. So people bring it in all different kinds of ways. There's a Tziruf Sal who talks about it. He says he wants the child's about whether you could sit on a container that has svarim inside of it. Okay, whether you could sit on a container that has svarim inside of it. So he says if it's bigger than memsa, then in his words, it's not a kli. It's like in another room. It's like imagine if I'm sitting here and downstairs is a sefer. I don't think, I'm sitting on top of the sefer because it's in a different room. That's okay. The Magen Avraham brings in okay, I don't know. The Magen Avraham brings it. That's the Hilchos Shabbos. The Magen Avraham brings it. The person has a sefer and it has to be mishamash mitasa in a room. It's considered to be in a separate room. Okay, so in all these a bunch of different examples where we see this din of size of a kli being transferred over to other dinim. A number of Achronim talk about this. Very bekitzer. I saw about it in Dayan Weiss, and I saw it in a drop in. The one who speaks about it more in depth is Rafal, has a tshuva about it. And he brings some rayas against. I'm only telling you the rayas for. I'm not telling you the rayas against. He seems pretty convinced that the same rule should apply for Tziruf Sal, back to where we want to talk is, which is once a thing is bigger than Memsa, it's not a Sal. It doesn't count. It's not anymore in a kli. It's like saying, should we say if we had 50 chalas in this room, we wouldn't say the mitzuruf, because the room should be mitzarefit. Rooms have to do with mukaf. Remember we talked about this, and we're going to get to it next time, about what mukaf is. Rooms could be mitzuref, maybe mitzaref things for mukaf, but not for tziruf sal. He says, so the border between a kli and a room, so to speak, is this thing of whether it's more or less than memsa. Okay? So, now, we can finally get to our pictures, our slides. And that is, obvious nafkamina for that is, whether something is more or less than memsa is going to be whether when you put things into a fridge or freezer, okay, which is for us a pretty unique case for us to have tziruf sal. We don't have many other chances to do that. And again, in order to do it, we have to meet all the other conditions of tziruf sal. Like we said, they have to be things that you're willing to have them mixed with each other. Okay, like we talked about at the beginning of today, they have to touch each other. There are other conditions to make tziruf sal, but assuming you have the potential, at least the possibility of doing it in a fridge or freezer is a likely case. Okay, so now, okay, how big is memsa? Okay, so the numbers you see here are our 4 shittas we spoke about at a different time, but these are 4 shittas, those are in cubic inches. Okay, they range from 16,000 to about 35,000 cubic inches to make a shirchal. A memsa. Okay, that's what it would be to be a memsa. Okay, so I'm going to give you some things just to help you place them. Okay, so the first is oven. Okay, most of these measurements were done at home. A typical oven was right there in the middle, okay? The size of the oven. Now, we can't do tziruf in an oven anyhow. We spoke about that. But the oven, just for size-wise, okay, it's somewhere in the middle between some bigger than memsa for some shittas and small for other shittas.
Measuring from the outside or from the inside?
What do you think I measured from? I measured from the outside. Of course, measure from the outside, okay? The Magen Avraham says in Hilchos Shabbos, he said, you want to know how you should measure? Measure from the outside, like it says in Mishayis and Kalim. Okay, you measure from the outside. Okay, so the oven was the easier one because the oven just has one, so to speak, outside. Okay? Okay, so now I'm going to show you some different fridges and freezers. Okay? I have here 5 different kinds of fridges and freezers. Okay? The top one, which is a smaller one. No, I didn't. No. My house and the neighbors. Okay, the top one, the smaller one, is that the number you see there is not is actually a small fridge, but it's almost the same as the downstairs fridge. I measured that this morning. The downstairs fridge here in the CRC is a Aruch that size. Okay, so that's that's like a smaller fridge or freezer. A little bit bigger than that is what you saw.
You have to add though, probably because it's like 18,000 cubic.
No, they talk about cubic feet. That's internal space. Right. This is external. The margin is external. Okay. And the next is a full-size freezer, like a whole big, just a freezer. A side-by-side freezer, fridge and freezer. Then the fourth one is like a regular, what I think is a regular like kitchen fridge or freezer, which is big, no head downstairs. And on the bottom is what's a sub-zero. Okay, those are very wide and very not deep. Okay, to fit nicely into your cabinets. Those have a really, really big body. Okay, so as you can see, every one of those fridges and freezers that we have here, if you measure it the way I told you, to include the fridge and the freezer together, is bigger than the share of Memsa. Okay? According to the way I'm measuring it this way, they're always going to be bigger than the share Memsa. If you want to see, not like that, I have 2 examples for you here. If you don't want to see them together, okay, the 2 unit parts together, this is the fridge and the freezer separate from each other, okay, for a small and a large fridge and freezer. You could do it for the other ones if you want to also. Okay, the numbers are approximate. They're not exact. It has to do with the wall in between. Okay, but the numbers are not exact. So you see over here, some of them are for sure not Memsa, okay, like this small freezer that we have downstairs is for sure not Machzik Memsa. Some of them are for sure are, okay, in a regular sized fridge it is, and some are in between. Okay, some of them are in between. Okay, so this possibility of doing a Tziruf Sal, I'm not sure if even a regular person would have, but let's say you go to a commercial bakery where they put their stuff into a freezer. Or in some of these cases, there's potential that we would say there's no Tziruf Sal because it's in a clear, it's Machzik Memsa. Okay, the last thing I have to tell you is, last time we spoke about why there's no Tziruf in a tanner. Okay, it's a machlokes in Yerushalmi, and we passed there's no tziruf in a tanner, and I told you then there are 4 reasons why there might not be tziruf in a tanner. I'm going to give 4 different reasons why it might not be. Most of those reasons are not negated to today, but one of them is negated to today's discussion. That's what I mean, today's discussion. But one of them was there were those who explained that the reason why a tanner can't have tziruf is because a tanner is attached to the ground. It's meant to, it just parked, it just stays there, and therefore there's no tziruf in the salad. There's nothing special about a tanner be'etzem. It's just that tanner is a representative of things that just sit still and they don't go anyplace. Okay, so some of the Achronim say, Rosham Zalman talks about it, I think Dan Weiss talks about it also, they say, as you know, if that's the pshat and why a tanner, there's no tziruf in a tanner, then a fridge should qualify for the same thing. The fridge is basically, for our purposes, is a tanner also. It just stays still, it stays put. Some of them who talk about this, like, they mix it with this memsa, and maybe it's the same thing. Maybe those 2 things are not so different from each other. The staying still and being memsa maybe are not so far from each other.
A smaller refrigerator is more likely to move from place to place.
Well, a small refrigerator like you have in a dormitory, like mom's like a little, of 2 feet by 2 feet. But the fridge that's downstairs in the kitchen downstairs, that's not going any place. Nobody's moving that around.
That's for the memsa anyway. The very small ones that are below memsa are also more likely.
Right. So those things are they're intertwined. The metaltal molivarekan and metaltal are very similar to each other. They're not so far apart from each other. Okay. So that child of tanner, the other reason that we give them to the tanner don't apply, not negate to us. Okay, and one last thing I'm telling you, I'm not going to tell you what it is, which is, I still owe you something. We're going to have another shayla about Tziruf Sal when we get to Simon Shin Chav Tes. Okay, when we talk about Blue Rakas, it's going to have its own special twist on Tziruf Sal in that case.